A businessman married a homeless woman to carry out his father's last wish. But when he came home that evening after the wedding, he froze in shock. Before we dive back in, drop a comment and let us know which city you're watching from. Enjoy the story. Dwayne stood by the window of his office on the 42nd floor of a skyscraper. A gray sky hung low over the city, and the river, winding between the embankments, reflected the dim glow of the streetlights. On the desk in front of him lay his father Robert's will, Robert, the founder of the media empire, Cultural Herald. Robert had died 3 weeks ago, leaving the company in shambles. Debts were piling up, competitors were closing in, and the ratings were in freefall. "Dwayne must get married within 30 days of my death," read the lines in Robert's sweeping handwriting. "If not, the controlling stake in Cultural Herald and all associated assets will be transferred to the Animal Protection Fund." Dwayne read the words again, anger and disbelief twisting in his chest. His father had always been eccentric, but this was absurd. The company he'd been fighting to save for years could collapse because of one ridiculous condition. "He's got to be joking," Dwayne muttered, glancing at Mike, his friend and the company's lead attorney. Mike, lounging in a leather chair, shrugged. "Legally, it's airtight. Either you get married, or say goodbye to the business. The foundation's already preparing to take over the shares." Dwayne clenched his fists. At 35, his life revolved around work. Meetings, negotiations, crisis control, he barely had time to sleep, let alone date. And now he had 30 days to find a wife or lose everything he'd built. He walked up to the window, staring at the faraway skyline. The city looked distant, indifferent, just like his own heart. But giving up wasn't an option. That evening, Dwayne and Mike were seated in a quiet restaurant. Outside, wet snow was falling, turning the sidewalks into mirrors that reflected neon signs. The waiter brought over 2 glasses of whiskey. Dwayne took a sip, trying to swallow his frustration. "I'm not going on some dating spree," he said, looking straight at Mike. "No time for flowers and dinners. The company's going under, and now this nonsense is on my back too." Mike tapped his fingers on the table thoughtfully. "Then go for a business deal. Find someone who's willing to sign a contract. Get married, meet the condition, and move on." Dwayne frowned. The idea sounded crazy, but the clock was ticking. He remembered reading a recent article about the homeless population living under the city's bridges. People with nothing to lose. "What if I pick someone who doesn't care?" he said, locking eyes with Mike. "Like, a homeless woman. I give her money, a place to live, she signs the papers. A formal marriage, no strings attached." Mike raised his eyebrows, then slowly nodded. "It's insane, but it could work. Just be careful. If the media gets wind of this, you're toast." Dwayne drained his whiskey. His mind was made up. He would find a wife, any wife, to save the company. The next evening, Dwayne was driving along the riverfront, gripping the steering wheel of his SUV. The icy wind howled outside, cutting through even his thick coat as he stepped out of the car. The river, dark and restless, reflected the faint light of the lamps, while the heavy gray sky above threatened to burst into snow at any moment. Dwayne pulled over near the edge where the pavement gave way to a slick staircase leading down to the river. His heart was racing, not from the cold, but from a strange feeling he couldn't quite name. Below, under the arch of the bridge, a fire burned. Its orange flames looked like the only warmth in that forgotten corner of the city. A few figures huddled around it, wrapped in worn-out coats and old blankets. Their faces, lit by the flickering light, were tired but carried a stubborn spark of life. He carefully made his way down the icy steps, placing each foot with caution to avoid slipping. His polished shoes looked out of place on the snow-covered, muddy slope. He felt like an outsider, stepping into a world he had never understood. Among those gathered at the fire, he noticed a woman. Her dark hair, tangled and damp from the mist, was pulled into a messy bun with stray strands falling loose. Despite the signs of a hard life on the streets, tired eyes, weathered skin, her face still held a kind of softness, high cheekbones, slightly sunken cheeks, cracked lips that still hinted at a beauty long buried. She sat closest to the fire, holding her hands out toward the flames. Her fingers were thin, rough, and trembling as they reached for warmth. But what struck Dwayne most was her expression, guarded, like someone who expected life to strike at any moment. There was pain in her features, but also a quiet strength that made him pause. He cleared his throat to get their attention. A few heads turned, but the woman only gave him a brief glance before turning back to the fire. Dwayne felt awkward, his usual business-like confidence fading fast in a place where expensive suits and commanding voices meant nothing. "Hi," he began, trying to sound calm, though his voice shook from the cold. "My name's Dwayne. I have a proposal. A business one." She slowly turned to face him, and her eyes were so piercing that Dwayne instinctively took a step back. The others around the fire stayed silent but watched his every move. The woman tilted her head slightly, as if sizing him up, and finally spoke. "Lynn," she said. Her voice was hoarse, but there was a surprising firmness in it. "What kind of proposal?" Dwayne took a deep breath, trying to pull himself together. He wasn't used to this kind of conversation, this kind of place, these kinds of people. But there was no turning back. His father's will loomed over him like a ticking clock. "I need a wife," he said. The word sounded ridiculous even to him. "It's just paperwork. A fake marriage. I'm offering $5 million and a place to live for a year. Everything spelled out in a contract." He spoke quickly, as if afraid she might cut him off or just walk away. Lynn said nothing. Her fingers fidgeted with a frayed thread on her old coat. Her face stayed calm, but a flicker of surprise and doubt passed through her eyes. The others glanced at each other. Someone gave a quiet snort, but no one spoke. "Why me?" she finally asked. Her voice was soft, but it cut straight through him. There was more than just caution in her question, there was something deeply personal, like she'd been waiting her whole life for the catch hidden in someone's words. Dwayne hesitated. He hadn't expected that. He didn't have an answer ready. In his world, everything was solved with money and contracts, but under this bridge, those rules didn't apply. He looked at her, trying to find words that would actually sound real. "Because I need help," he said, his voice quieter now. "And you need a chance. It's a deal. A fair one. No strings." Lynn stared at him for a long moment, her gaze scanning his face like she was searching for cracks in his armor. Dwayne felt exposed in a way he wasn't used to, more vulnerable than he'd felt even at the thought of losing his company. He was a man who always stayed in control, but this woman sitting by the fire was shaking his confidence. She turned to glance at the others, an older man wrapped in a worn-out coat, and a young woman sitting nearby with her knees pulled to her chest. Lynn let out a long sigh, one so heavy with exhaustion that Dwayne wanted to look away. But he didn't. Her eyes came back to his, and now there was a quiet resolve in them. "I'll do it," she said, her voice firm despite the tremble in her hands. "But there's one condition. My friend Monica," she nodded toward the girl beside her, "she can't stay here. She needs a place to live and a job. She's only 19. She deserves a shot." Dwayne looked at Monica. Thin, pale, her blonde hair a tangled mess, she looked barely older than a child. Her eyes met his, full of fear and fragile hope, and he felt a sharp pang of guilt. He had wanted a clean deal, something simple and transactional, but now, staring at these two lives hanging in the balance, it wasn't so simple anymore. "All right," he said, silently cursing himself for letting things spiral like this. "I'll help her. She'll have a place and a job. I'll take care of it." Lynn nodded, but her face stayed guarded. She didn't trust him, he could feel that. But in her agreement, there was something more than a need for money or shelter. There was a flicker of hope, faint, but real, and it lit up her features when she glanced at Monica. "Deal," she said quietly. "Tomorrow. 10 a.m. outside the metro station. I'll be there." Dwayne nodded, feeling the cold cut straight through him. He turned and climbed back up to his car, his footsteps echoing on the frozen stairs. But as he slid into the warmth of the driver's seat, he couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted inside him. Lynn, her voice, her presence, it all stayed with him like an echo he couldn't silence. For the first time in a long while, he didn't feel like just a businessman. He felt like a man capable of something more than deals and signatures. 3 days later, Dwayne and Lynn stood in City Hall. No guests, no flowers, no champagne, just harsh fluorescent lighting and an indifferent clerk handing them papers. Lynn looked out of place in the hastily bought dress. Her hands trembled slightly as she signed her name. "Congratulations," the clerk said flatly, handing over the marriage certificate. Dwayne took the paper in silence and led Lynn to the car. They drove without speaking until they pulled up to a luxury high-rise. His apartment took up the entire top floor, marble floors, designer furniture, and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the park. "This is your room," he said, pointing to a door at the end of the hallway. "There's clothes in the closet and money on the card. Stay out of my business, and we'll be fine." Lynn nodded. In the evenings, she would sit in the living room, staring out at the city lights, feeling like a stranger in this lifeless world. Dwayne came home late, spoke little, and looked at her like she was just a temporary inconvenience. He kept his word. Monica got a room and a job at a printing shop, but Lynn still felt guilty. Her new life felt like a cage, lavish, but empty. One night, Dwayne came home earlier than usual and found Lynn reading. She was on the couch, surrounded by books from his library, media ethics, journalism history, Hemingway's biography. A cup of tea sat on the table, and the room smelled faintly of vanilla from a candle Lynn had found somewhere. "You're actually reading this?" he asked, surprised, pointing at a book on press freedom. Lynn smiled, but there was sadness in it. "I majored in journalism. Worked at a magazine, until everything fell apart." She told her story while staring out the window. Her voice was quiet but steady. Lynn had once dreamed of being an investigative journalist, of exposing corruption and giving a voice to the unheard. But a betrayal by a colleague and a staged scandal had cost her everything: her job, her reputation, her home. She bounced between cheap rentals until she ended up on the street. Dwayne listened, hiding his surprise. He'd expected a broken woman. But here was someone with fire in her soul and a hunger to learn. For the first time, he felt ashamed of how he'd treated her. A week later, Dwayne brought Lynn to a reception at a private mansion. The city's elite, businessmen, officials, media moguls, had gathered to discuss deals and swap gossip. Lynn, in a simple black dress, felt completely out of place. People glanced her way, whispering over glasses of champagne. But when the conversation turned to media censorship, she couldn't stay quiet. "Freedom of the press isn't a privilege, it's a responsibility," she said, staring at a media mogul boasting about his influence. "When journalists stay silent, they betray the people who trust them." The room fell silent. Her words, sharp and sincere, struck a nerve. Some clapped. Others frowned. But Lynn didn't stop. She spoke about corruption, about bribes, about how truth drowns in noise. Dwayne watched her, seeing not just his contract wife, but a woman who could outshine everyone in that room. "Who is she?" the guests whispered. Dwayne just sipped his wine in silence. He wasn't sure whether to feel proud, or worried. Soon, trouble deepened around Cultural Herald. A rival media giant, Media Empire, led by Trevor Kowalski, filed a lawsuit accusing the publication of defamation. The trigger? An article published a month ago, in which Cultural Herald reporters exposed shady dealings in a construction company tied to Kowalski. The piece, backed by documents and witness statements, had caused a stir in the media. The public was demanding an investigation, but instead of defending himself, Kowalski went on the attack. The lawsuit demanded millions in damages, an amount that could sink Dwayne's already struggling media group. He sat in his office on the top floor of the skyscraper, staring at a thick stack of legal documents. Outside, a light rain blurred the city lights into a dull gray haze. This wasn't just a lawsuit. It felt like the next move in a well-planned attack. Kowalski, infamous for his ruthless tactics, had been eyeing Cultural Herald for years. Swallowing it up would cement his grip on the media world. Kowalski wants to destroy us, Dwayne said, turning to Mike, his friend and the company's chief legal officer, who was flipping through papers at the table. And I'm sure he's already digging for dirt on Lynn. If he finds anything, he'll use it to finish us off. Lynn stood frozen at the door, holding a tray of coffee she'd brought from the meeting room. She hadn't meant to eavesdrop, but Dwayne's words hit her like a punch. Her chest tightened with fear and guilt. She knew her past was her biggest vulnerability. Years ago, Kowalski had already ruined her once, slandered her, wrecked her career, and left her with nothing. Back then, she was Hillary Foster, a rising star in journalism. Now, as Lynn, she was trying to rebuild a life. If he uncovered her real identity, it would destroy not just Dwayne's credibility, but her own fragile fight for justice. She gripped the tray tighter. But instead of walking away, she stepped forward. There was no more room to hide. Later that night, while Dwayne argued with attorneys on the phone in the next room, Lynn stayed behind in the office. On his desk lay folders related to the lawsuit, witness statements, financial reports, email threads. She couldn't just ignore them. Her old instincts, buried deep for years, suddenly came alive. She started skimming the documents, eyes scanning fast and sharp. In the witness statements, she spotted inconsistencies. One person was referred to by different names, and the dates didn't line up. The financial reports submitted by Media Empire looked too clean, almost like they'd been polished before hitting the court. When Dwayne finally returned, he found her at his desk, surrounded by papers. She looked up, her eyes clear and focused. "I can help," she said, calm but firm. "I know how to dig for the truth. Just give me a chance." Dwayne frowned, his tired eyes searching her face. To him, she had been just a contract wife, a woman who stumbled into his life by accident. But there was something in her voice, something in the fire behind her words, that made him pause. Weariness and pressure chipped away at his doubts. "All right," he said, rubbing his temples. "But if this doesn't work, we both go down. Don't screw it up." Lynn nodded, adrenaline pulsing through her veins. This was her shot, not just to help Dwayne, but to prove to herself that she was still the journalist who believed in the truth. She threw herself into the work with obsession, forgetting to eat or sleep. Day and night, she pored over documents, scribbled notes, chased every lead. She reached out to Ian, an old colleague from her magazine days who now ran an independent blog on corruption. Ian, with his nose for a good story, quickly tracked down a witness willing to admit he'd been bribed by Media Empire. Lynn also reached out to Sheila, a lawyer who had helped her in the past. As Sheila combed through the reports, she uncovered forged signatures and clear signs of tampering in the financial documents. A week later, Lynn walked into Dwayne's office holding a folder packed with evidence. Rain poured outside, wrapping the city in a gray veil, but there was fire in her eyes. "This case is sloppy," she said, placing the folder on his desk. "Kowalski bribed the witnesses, and his financial reports are fake. Here's the proof, testimonies, recordings, documents. We don't just have a chance to fight back. We can take him down." Dwayne flipped through the folder, his eyebrows climbing higher with every page. He looked at Lynn with a new kind of respect, for the first time, seeing not just a contractual partner, but a professional who could turn the tide. "You're incredible," he said, a hint of awe in his voice. Working together brought them closer. One evening, they stayed late at the office, sitting in the meeting room over cups of coffee. Rain streamed down the windows, painting soft patterns on the glass. The city, shrouded in mist, felt distant and unfamiliar. Dwayne looked at Lynn and asked, "Why didn't you give up? After everything Kowalski did to you?" Lynn shrugged, her fingers wrapped around the warm cup. "Because the truth is the only thing that matters," she said softly. "Even if the world's against you, even if it sounds naive, I still believe it changes everything." Her words struck something in him. Dwayne, who'd spent his life in the cynical game of business, suddenly felt like he was seeing life through new eyes. Lynn wasn't fighting for herself, she was fighting for something bigger. For justice. For the ones without a voice. "You're not naive," he said, his voice gentler now. "You're real. And I'm starting to understand why you're here." Lynn smiled, and her smile felt like sunlight breaking through a rainy day. In that moment, something sparked between them, not just respect, but something deeper. Something neither of them was ready to name. Soon after, Lynn received a handwritten note, "Stop digging, or you'll regret it." She didn't tell Dwayne, she didn't want to worry him, but fear crept into her heart. One night, as she was walking home from the library, she noticed a shadow around the corner. Two hooded men lunged at her, but just then, a shout broke the silence. "Get away from her!" Dwayne, who happened to be nearby, rushed in and shoved the attackers off. One bolted, the other took a hit to the jaw. Lynn trembled, pressed against the wall. Dwayne helped her up, his hands warm and steady. "You okay?" he asked, looking straight into her eyes. She nodded, but tears streamed down her cheeks. For the first time, she felt that he truly cared. Later, back at the office, Lynn accidentally called herself Hillary while discussing an old investigation with Ian. Dwayne, who had been standing by the door, froze. "Who are you really?" he asked, his voice suddenly sharp. Lynn let out a long breath and told him everything. She had once been a well-known journalist, until Kowalski destroyed her career, accusing her of plagiarism and framing her with fake evidence. She'd been forced to disappear, change her name, and leave her old life behind. "I didn't want you to find out," she said, staring at the floor. "I was afraid you'd kick me out." Dwayne stayed silent. His face was calm, but there was a flicker of sympathy in his eyes. "You should have told me," he finally said. "But I'm not kicking you out. We'll face this together." The day of the shareholder meeting arrived, and the tension in the conference room was thick. The massive hall, lined with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the glowing city, was packed. Investors in sharp suits whispered over papers, journalists with notepads and cameras crowded the walls, and rivals, including Trevor Kowalski, sat front row, their expressions unreadable. Lynn stood to the side, gripping the folder of evidence she had spent countless nights compiling. Her heart was racing, but inside her burned a fire she hadn't felt since her days in the newsroom. This was her moment, not just to save Cultural Herald, but to reclaim the voice Kowalski had stolen from her years ago. When the chairman announced her name, the room fell silent. Lynn stepped toward the podium, her footsteps echoing through the vast space. She wore a simple navy blue dress that emphasized her delicate frame, but her posture and expression radiated strength. In her hands was the folder, her weapon, her truth. She took a deep breath, remembering those nights under the bridge, when hope felt like a distant dream. And now she was here, ready to fight. "Ladies and gentlemen, fellow shareholders," she began, her voice calm but taut like a wire. "Media Empire has accused Cultural Herald of defamation. They claim we lied. But today, I'm here to show you the truth." She opened the folder and began presenting the evidence piece by piece with surgical precision. Falsified financial reports, signed by non-existent individuals. Audio recordings of bribed witnesses discussing their roles. A sworn statement from an honest Media Empire employee who had decided to come forward. Every word she spoke hit like a hammer, shattering the lies Kowalski had built. She spoke with the same clarity and force that once made her reporting strike fear into corrupt officials. But now, there was something more, pain from everything she had lost and strength born from surviving it. Media empire tried to silence us, she said, lifting her gaze to the crowd. They wanted to crush us. But the truth always wins. And today, it's standing right in front of you. Her final words hung in the air, and for a moment, the room was completely still. Then the hall erupted into applause. Investors rose to their feet. Journalists shouted over one another. Cameras flashed, capturing the moment history shifted. Lynn stood there, trembling slightly, but her face was glowing. She watched as Kowalski, seated in the front row, turned pale. His usual arrogant expression twisted into something almost fearful. Without saying a word, he stood and walked out, like a shadow fading in the light of truth. The reputation of Cultural Herald was saved, and Lynn, the woman the world once cast aside, became the hero of the day. After the meeting, reporters surrounded her, firing off questions. Who are you? Where did all this evidence come from? What's next? Lynn smiled, but it wasn't for the cameras. She felt something awaken inside her, the return of Hilary Foster, the journalist who once believed in justice. She had come back to life, and that meant more than any headline ever could. In the days that followed, offers came pouring in. A top newspaper invited her to lead its investigative desk, while competitors offered her a column and hefty paychecks. But Lynn turned them all down. Her place was here, with Dwayne, at Cultural Herald, which had become more than just a job. It was home. Together, they launched an investigative journalism division, bringing in a team of young, fearless reporters. Within a year, the team became an industry standard. Their stories, exposing corruption at City Hall, shedding light on everyday lives, sparked conversations and changed lives. Lynn also founded the New Horizon Foundation, named after her own hope for a second chance. The foundation supported young journalists, especially those who, like her, had faced hardship. She led workshops, shared her story, and helped others find their voice. Her name echoed through the media world. She was invited to talk shows and conferences, but Lynn stayed the same, genuine, warm, and deeply rooted in the belief that truth can heal. She often thought of Monica, her friend from those nights under the bridge, who now worked at the print shop and was building a new life. Those memories reminded Lynn why she kept fighting. Dwayne watched her with pride that grew every day. He knew Cultural Herald wouldn't have survived without her. But more than that, she had changed him. The cold businessman, once driven only by deals and deadlines, had learned to see the world through her eyes, full of compassion and hope. One evening, Lynn stood by the window of their apartment, looking out over the golden lights of the city glowing in the sunset. The river shimmered like melted gold, and the city buzzed with its endless rhythm. Dwayne walked up quietly behind her, his steps soft on the marble floor. He stopped beside her, watching the warm light trace the outline of her face. "I was selfish," he said, his voice shaking with emotions he'd kept buried for too long. "When we met, I saw you as a way to save the company. A way to fulfill my father's will. But you changed everything, Lynn. You taught me how to live, how to love, how to believe. I love you. Not because you saved Cultural Herald, but because you're you." Lynn turned to him, her eyes shimmering with tears, tears of joy. She saw something in his face she hadn't seen at the beginning of their journey. Back then, he was closed off, distant. Now, standing before her, was the man who had become her home. "I love you too," she whispered, her voice barely audible but filled with warmth. "You gave me a chance when I thought everything was lost. And now I know, we can do anything, as long as we're together." They embraced, their hearts beating in sync. In that moment, what started as a fake marriage born out of desperation became something real. Lynn held on to Dwayne, feeling his warmth, his strength, his love. Outside, the city kept moving. But for them, only this moment existed, the moment they chose each other. They decided not to divorce. Instead, they would build a future full of dreams and promises, knowing that together, they were unstoppable. Under Lin's influence, Cultural Herald became a symbol of honest journalism. The paper shed light on social issues, fought corruption, and gave a voice to those long forgotten. The New Horizon Foundation supported dozens of young journalists, and Lin became their mentor and guide. Dwayne changed. He became more attentive to his team, started appreciating the simple things: morning coffee with Lin, walks in the park, late-night talks about books. The cold mask of a businessman melted away, and for the first time, he felt truly alive. Their apartment transformed. The once bare walls now displayed artwork by young local artists. Shelves overflowed with books. A vintage record player filled the living room with music. In the evenings, they'd drink tea, laugh, and play old vinyl records. Lin taught Dwayne how to cook pasta, and even though he ruined 3 pans, he was proud when he finally got it right. "You're a terrible cook," she teased, tasting his overly salty creation. "But at least I'm trying," he replied, wrapping his arms around her. They found joy in the little things: park strolls, long talks about the future, and dreams of traveling. Lin dreamed of seeing Easter Island, and Dwayne promised they'd go there together. On their wedding anniversary, Dwayne planned a surprise. He took Lin to the same bridge where they had first met. It had since been transformed into a public art space, filled with murals, lanterns, and exhibitions. Street musicians played beneath it, and the river reflected the colors of the sunset. "Remember how we met?" he asked, pulling out a small box with a ring inside. "Back then, I proposed out of desperation. Now, I want to do it for real. Lin, will you be my wife, not by contract, but out of love?" Lin smiled, her eyes shimmering. "You're hopelessly romantic," she said, taking the ring. "Yes. I will." They stood on the bridge, holding each other as the sun dipped below the horizon. Dwayne and Lin kissed, unaware of the people passing by, some smiling at the sight of them. Their love had survived lies, threats, and heartbreak, but it only grew stronger. "We made it," Lin whispered, resting her head on his chest. "And we always will," Dwayne replied, knowing this was the first time in his life he truly felt at home. They had proven that love wasn't just a word, it was a force strong enough to heal and change the world. A year passed. Their life, once built on deals and desperation, was now full of warmth, laughter, and new meaning. In their apartment, once quiet and cold, children's voices now echoed. Little Sophia, their daughter, was born in the spring, just as the cherry trees in the park burst into white bloom. Her dark eyes, a gift from Lin, and her gentle smile, just like Dwayne's, became the center of their world. The morning was clear, the air crisp with the scent of rain from the night before. Dwayne, Lin, and baby Sophia, bundled in a soft blanket, were driving through the quiet streets. People bustled along the sidewalks, and pale autumn sunlight glowed over the square. But inside their car, it was calm, broken only by Sophia's soft babble as she reached out for her toy. "She looks so much like you," Dwayne said, watching as Lin gently adjusted the blanket. Lin smiled, her eyes sparkling with joy. "And I think she has your personality. Already stubborn, just like her dad." Dwayne laughed, warmth blooming in his chest. He never imagined he could love this much, not just Lin, but the tiny girl who had changed everything. They were on their way to the city cemetery, to visit Robert's grave, Dwayne's father. He had wanted to go for a long time, but only now, with his family beside him, did he feel ready. They stopped by the grave, nestled beneath old oak trees. A simple granite stone bore Robert's name, covered with a thin layer of fallen leaves. Lin held Sophia in her arms as Dwayne knelt, brushing the leaves away. His fingers touched the cold stone, and he closed his eyes, as if trying to feel his father's presence. "Thank you, Dad," he whispered. You were always a bit strange, but your will, it brought me to her. To Lynn. To our daughter. I didn't just find a wife. I found love. A family. Everything you probably wanted from me. Lynn gently rested a hand on his shoulder. Her touch was soft, but full of strength. Sophia cooed quietly, as if agreeing, and Lynn smiled, holding her daughter closer. The wind rustled through the branches above, carrying Dwayne's words upward, toward the sky, where he hoped his father could hear them. He'd be proud, Lynn said, her voice warm like the autumn sun. You've become not just a leader, but the man he always hoped you'd be. Dwayne stood and wrapped his arms around his girls, their warmth chasing away the morning chill. They stayed there a while, looking at the grave, at the city, at the life they had built. When they got back to the car, Sophia was asleep in Lynn's arms. Dwayne started the engine, but before pulling away, he looked at his wife. I'm happy, he said simply. Lynn nodded, her eyes glowing. So am I. We're home, Dwayne. For good. Their car rolled slowly out of the cemetery, melting into the flow of city streets.